Welcome everyone to another AFK video. So today I wanted to talk a bit about Bandai's ban and restriction announcement for the Gundam TCG. So I know that this announcement came out a couple days ago, but due to some medical concerns and other things going on, I wasn't able to make the video right away, but thankfully all of that is out of the way, and now I can sit down and talk about this. So in my discussion video, I talked a bit about um, the blue and purple or the blurple deck itself. I talked about what made it strong, and I talked about some solutions, right? So in the solutions bit of that video, um, I talked about my thoughts on what I believed at the time to be one of the more equitable solutions for all players, right? So ultimately, I landed on the pair ban system that Bandai has done for uh, some of their other card games, where they say that two cards, right, can't be played in the same deck. And the idea was to pair ban Amuro and Mikazuki because they are very powerful cards that kind of enable these decks. The idea was going to be that you wouldn't have to take cards out of the pool, right? It would make it so that you would be able to use these cards in weaker decks without having to worry about not being able to use them at all, right? It's just that you couldn't use them in this Blurple combination. Um, I thought that maybe that was one of the better ways to go so that people can continue to use their cards, right? But it seems that Bandai has come up with their own solution and what they think the correct way forward is. Bandai's solution comes in the form of a restriction, and they have decided that Corsica Base will be limited to 2 copies per deck. So, Corsica Base is one of the most popular bases that is used in the Blurple decks. It is pretty much run exclusively as a 4 of. There were some instances I saw where some players experimented with a few copies of White Base instead. Um, so when I was preparing my video, I did have it in my notes to talk a bit about Corsica Base. I recorded some content, but it ultimately didn't really make its way into the final video since I wanted to try and save some time. But I guess now is a good time to talk about what I thought about Corsica Base. So Corsica Base does a lot of heavy lifting because it fills a lot of different roles all at once, right? So you play it and it's a base, right? So it protects you from losing the game, right? It's a 5 HP base. It's a bit expensive on the cost, but because of all the different things that it does, I think ultimately it's well worth the cost, right? So first, like I said, you get a base, you get a body or bodies, depending on which copy of Corsica this is. And in the early to mid game, this also acts as card advantage, right? Because when you deploy a base, no matter if you get the tokens or not, you will still get to take one of your shields into your hand. So this can be thought of as card advantage because it just is. It's replacing itself, right? So this card does 3 things all at once, right? On top of that, the first Corsica base is valuable because it gives you the big tall geese, right? Now, the big tall geese does not have a whole lot of HP, so it actually gets pinged out pretty easily by, Barbatos Adapt and Mikazuki combination. Or if your opponent plays an Amuro and then, plays 2 gun tanks, you just lose the token, right? Um, However, your opponent still has to use resources in order to get rid of this token because it is another body. Use it to try and break bases, so it can be very effective in that respect. But then, one thing that I didn't really think about in my notes was that the second and third and fourth instance of the Corsica base are actually more powerful given depending on the board state, right? So when you play a second or third or fourth Corsica base, because there's already one in your trash, you get two 1/1 Leo tokens, right? Now, obviously, the Leo tokens are significantly weaker than the Tallgeese token, right? So in most situations, you think that you would prefer the Tallgeese token, but you have to remember that this is an aggro deck. The entire point is that you try to deploy as many bodies as possible to overwhelm your opponent and kind of have to force them to expend their resources to make sure that they don't win the game, right? So I remember playing at a locals once where I was flooding the board constantly with units. And despite the fact that I never played a single base, by the end of the game, I had all of my shields. Um, and my opponent lamented that they couldn't even touch my shields because they had to use all of their resources to, keep my board under control. So being able to deploy all of these units, whether it be via the Corsica base or not, kind of acts as a deterrent for your opponent to attack your base directly or your shields directly. Because if they do decide not to deal with your board for whatever reason, then they just straight up lose the game because that's just how the game is, right? I have a bunch of units, your shields only have 1 HP, so it doesn't matter that my Leos or whatever, or 1/1s, they can still take out your shields. And that's important, right? So, like I said, I didn't think about the implications of the second, third, and fourth Corsica bases, but now that I think about it, and since we're now restricted to two, right, um, you have to think about, okay, well, you're very less likely to see them now because you only have two copies, right? So the consistency bit has been hit. But also now you're only ever going to get the Tallgeese and the Leos, or just the Leos, right? Or neither, right? If both of them are in your shields and they get activated on your opponent's turn, you run the risk of not getting any tokens at all. And of course, you always run this risk no matter what, but when you have access to 4 copies, you are a lot more likely to, yes, have some in your shields, but also be able to play them on your hand, play them from your hand, I should say, so that you are able to get those tokens proactively. So I did want to make one quick note about the announcement. So in my video, I noted that one of the reasons I didn't want, or that I suspected that Bandai didn't want to outright ban cards that could only be attained through starter decks like Amuro, was that it made the product incomplete, kind of. So it's like, oh, I want to play with, these Heroic Beginnings deck, but Amuro was banned, so I need to find 4 cards to replace it, right? Now, let me just pull up the announcement here. So at the bottom here, it says, we recognize that 3 copies of STO-216 Corsica Base are included in the Wings of Advance STO-2 starter deck, and players will still be able to use this deck in an official sanctioned tournament so long as no changes are made to its contents. Well, I mean, pretty straightforward there. So this means that the the 2 copy restriction of Corsica Base is still in place. However, if you purchase a copy of the Wings of Advance starter deck, so long as you don't make any other changes to it, you can use it as is, which I think is pretty solid. I think it's a really good move. It allows, like I said, new players to buy a product and be able to use it straight out the box if it's all they have, right? And, they don't get the rug pulled out from under them when they try to use it. So, yeah, I think that's good. And this is likely what they could have done in the event, obviously, that they had banned something like Amuro. But yeah, I just wanted to point that out because I thought it was interesting and worth noting. Now, ultimately, I'm not sure what this will do to really affect the Blurple deck, right? At the time of recording this video, tomorrow the Dusseldorf, if I'm not mistaken, event will begin. That will be on April 1st. So this restriction will be in effect. So at that tournament, anybody who is running Blurple will only be able to run 2 Corsica bases for the remainder of that event. So we'll see if people think that it's worth still playing Blurple despite the restriction, right? And I imagine that people will still want to play it because so nothing else in the list was hit, so you're still able to use everything at maximum values except for Corsica. I imagine those Corsicas may get replaced with white base. And the reason that you have some that white base is problematic is because you can only activate it once per turn, which means you only ever get the one unit token, which is really more useful in the late game when you are not when you're top decking and when you're not getting the units that you need. At least you have something on the field that can generate field advantage for you. But we'll have to see, right? I'm interested in seeing the numbers for that event, seeing the deck share, and I'm curious to see if the Blurple deck will continue to have its massive turn-on, massive dominance as it did at the World Championships, right? Um, Hopefully, though, this will open up the field for some more diversity, right? I'm hoping that we get to see more decks kind of get to shine because despite the fact that there are a lot of strong decks in the meta right now, and not just aggro and blockers, right? But despite all that, in the previous format, you weren't really able to see any of that because of how oppressively strong the Blurple deck was, right? But in any case, that basically sums up all my thoughts. And I wanted to kind of get an idea of where you, the viewer, were thinking about this ban or this restriction announcement, I should say. So let me know what you think in the comments, and I will see you in the next video.